What? No, they can't see you. Go away. No, you too. What? I'm just kidding. I'm all alone here. There's only me.
Would you
Hi.
like some lemonade? With
That would
that,
be great.
with that, welcome to this month's episode of the 800s. I am your host, Alex, and you just heard from my other host, and who is also apparently a host to somebody else, Adam. And
Don't worry, they're not real.
as always, the guy that you can't see but we knows there, Alan, making all the tech stuff happen. Thank you for that.
He's he's totally real too.
Yeah, totally real. Like you can see him typing there. Why don't we go ahead and jump into our plugs then, so we can get talking about your book.
Sure thing. If you joined us for our quite brief intro, you heard some music. Fearless First from Incompetech. They've got a ton of cool scores. So you should go check them out at incompetech.filmmusic.io. I'm pretty sure that link is still active. Let me double check real quick. It's not, but if you go to filmmusic.io, you can find Incompetech scores on that website. We'll have to update that website sometime soon. Get a good link going.
Mm-hmm.
Patreon is our main way of making money. If you would like to vote on what book we read next, you should hit up our Patreon. Link is below your video. Also, Etsy is a cool site that allows you to sell stuff. For us, that means nerd memorabilia and cool graphics and stuff like that. If you want to check it out, you should head over to dmstable.com/Etsy. Let's see here. We got a YouTube channel. We're the DM's Table on YouTube. We put all of our various videos on YouTube, so you can check that out. And if you're looking for a new way to experience your books, might I suggest audiobooks? You can get audiobooks from Audible. Audible is super cheap. And if that's not enough of a reason to join them, you can have some free time and credits from them by signing up through us. Go to dmstable.com/audible for a free trial today. We have a couple of socials, Facebook and X. We're at the DM's Table on Facebook, and we're at X, or on X, we're at DM's Table. Sorry, confused myself there. On X, we're at DM's Table.
Let's be real.
I was sitting here like, say X, say X, say X, and then I said X instead of at DM's Table. Hit us up on our socials if you'd like to stay in touch. If you're looking for a more intimate nerd atmosphere, you can hit us up on our socials for our Discord link, and you can chat with us pretty much whenever. We talk about nerdy stuff all the time on our Discord. Hooray!
Yay!
I think that's about it for plugs.
All right. So this week on the 800s, we'll be discussing Brandon Sanderson's standalone novella, Legion. In the near future, there exists a man named Stephen Leeds, also known by some as Legion, even if he doesn't like it. He's employed by people the world over to solve the most unsolvable problems due to his expertise in numerous fields of study. How does he accomplish this? With the help of his 50 or so hallucinations, each genius in their field. With Stephen as their interface with the world, the hallucinations help Stephen with his cases. But the answer to how to live with 50 or more people in your head, does it take one, or does it take a legion?
And with that, I'll give you guys a quick rundown of how our show operates here. We are a discussion show. So how that works is Alex or myself will pose a topic or question for discussion. And at that point, feel free to type up your thoughts on the topic or question in chat. While you're doing that, Alex and I will discuss amongst ourselves what we think about the topic, and then we'll look at chat for any sort of cool little tidbits that you guys have. Where do these topics and questions come from? Great question, Adam. Uh, it comes from chat or Alex or myself. So if you have anything that you would like to discuss about the book, feel free to throw it into chat at any time. That's pretty much it.
All right, and and as always, this is a show geared towards adults. We do cover adult topics, situations, themes, etc. So, and while we try not to swear too much, we, don't exactly stop ourselves either. So bring kids around at your own discretion. Also, we are trying to create a fun and supportive community over here at DM's Table where people can feel free to indulge in their many interests and hobbies without any fear of reprisal or judgment or anything like that. So, as always, to sum it up, be nice or fuck off.
Going musical today.
Felt like it.
With that, let's cut right to the chase and talk about the book. What were your first thoughts of Legion?
So when we first got into it, something to preface this with, I guess, because there was a preface. There in the audiobook version, there is a little blurb from Brandon Sanderson about like his actual writing the book. So I went into this kind of looking for like how much of Brandon Sanderson is showing up in this, and so like my first impressions were kind of skewed by that. But I was just like, I think, considering how curious I was about that preface, it speaks to how engaging this book was that question left my mind pretty quickly, and I was just kind of sucked into the book. I'm psychology nerd, so like this idea of a person who has essentially like schizophrenia, but it has harnessed it to make his life presumably better or more successful was an interesting premise to begin with, and I thought it did a good job of showing how that might be possible for somebody who has the like I found it very plausible that this could be a person who just kind of has a more specified extreme ability. So I found it pretty engaging right from the get-go, and both from a academic and from like an entertainment standpoint. The many or singular character, depending on how you're looking at it. I thought it was handled pretty well from the get-go to give you an idea of what he's dealing with without overwhelming you in the way that you might be overwhelmed if you suddenly had 50 people to like keep track of.
Yeah.
How about you, Adam?
Very, very similar. I love a good Brando Sando novel. This one kind of, to me, felt a little different than what we normally get from Brando Sando. Less fantasy or sci-fi and more he's trying to emulate the real world, which is kind of interesting, but he's still got to have his twist on it, right? It's a very compelling book that sucks you in right from the get-go. Right from the start, he's like, listen, this ain't schizophrenia. But if you got to think about it like schizophrenia, then it's schizophrenia. It's really, really fast paced, which is something not typical of Brando Sando. Usually he's kind of a drawn out, slow burn, slow intro kind of author, and he really jumped right into it with this one. Barely get to know the lay of the land, and we're already on the case, ready to go. It was very exciting.
Yeah, it's very action-packed, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the fact that it is not a traditional Brandon Sanderson book in pacing or in setting, but like speaks to him as an author that he can go so into wildly different, you know, space and write a book that's that compelling. Stormy makes a good point that it was fast paced, but Brandon Sanderson did do a great job of developing Stephen as a character. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the character layout of this book has a lot of challenges when good half of the characters aren't real. uh, and I think Brando Sando walks a fine line here with determining how much a character can be their own person and how much they have to be somewhat like Stephen in regards to having a mental disorder or certain personality tics. It's I thought it was kind of interesting to try and watch his manifestations to see if they have similarities with Stephen throughout the book. I didn't find like a whole ton of things. I often forgot that I was looking at that and I was just listening along like, oh, this is a good story. Oh, right. I was trying to pay attention to their personalities. But um, yeah, Stephen is definitely a very unique character, and Brando Sano does a good job of driving the story with trying to unravel what exactly is going on inside of Stephen's head. What did you think about Stephen?
I mean, as far as character development goes, I actually kind of had a similar framework that I was working with it to you, in that I was trying to see like where does the line start to blur between him and his manifestation, like forget what he calls them. Somebody could put it in chat. I can't remember for the life of me what he calls like the different people in his aspects. That's one. Well, because I think him calling them aspects is what actually triggered me to start looking for those similarities. And I think honestly, I found more similarities in the coping mechanisms that I think V.S. Drake alluded to than I did like their areas of expertise. Like what did they represent, uh, and the way that they coped with their be like some like on some level all of them know that they're not real, um and like how did they cope, and it seems like a lot more that was the where it would blur because they are coping mechanisms for him to deal with the fact that he doesn't always like he didn't always know the difference between the real world and what was imaginary, and hoisting it off on them you know kind of allowed for him to develop as an individual character. And it's weird to think that like all these other characters, their character development is also his, right? In a way.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like that was just an interesting part of the story in and of itself. Like it self-contained an interesting part of it, and it was really well done in how you were able to kind of tease at that stuff, get some answers, but there was enough mystery left over to, keep you going, not just for the mystery of it all, but also for the, character development aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, V.S. Drake says, I find it interesting that he explores his character types sort of often. I saw a minor similarity to Shallan in Stormlight, and I remember there being another character in a different book, maybe. Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of similarities drawn. Well, rephrase. Sando likes to explore different uh, mental states a lot. I think I think that's one of the things that make his characters seem more real is everybody's got some sort of difference in their head that makes them unique.
Oh yeah, and it's not just like those differences in their head that makes them unique, but like the differences are not necessarily mental health related. They're sometimes just like, how do I look at the world from a different viewpoint? And he does a good job of Brandon Sanderson does a good job of putting you in these characters and giving you a different viewpoint to look at the world from. And all he did with this book was put all of those viewpoints into a single character's head, you know. And like I think that's like one of his best abilities is like taking you, like you can look at the same rock from 3 different characters and get something totally different out of that rock. And in this case, it's just one character that contains multitudes. So
Yeah.
Looks like Stormraid said he also liked how Brandon introduced the girlfriend and slowly developed her. So what did you think of why am I blanking on the girlfriend as well? I can't remember a single character name aside from like Stephen.
Sandra.
Yeah, Sandra.
Is that it?
Yeah. Sandra's her character. What did you think of her as a character in general?
I definitely think Sanderson wrote Sandra to be the foil to Stephen. It's at least for the last story, because she was somebody who wanted to get rid of her aspects, where Stephen was somebody who wanted to keep his aspects and use them. Even to an extreme extent. Fiestrake, don't give me too credit. I've got the wiki pulled up on the other screen, so I just looked over there. Sorry. Yeah, I thought she played a really important role in getting Stephen to accept his state fully. You know, before that he called it a coping mechanism for the entirety of the book. He was like, yeah, I learned this coping mechanism from Sandra. This is how I cope with my condition. I learned it from Sandra. You know, through the entire book, he has that. And then he goes and finds Sandra and he's like, this is me. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
My aspects are me. This isn't a coping mechanism. It's me.
You know, I like that interpretation of like I agree with her being a foil like only for the last book. I think, but I really like your explanation of like the part she played in his character development as a like she was kind of like a lighthouse for a very long time, and then he got to the right lighthouse and realized, oh, well, now I need to navigate land on my own. Like it's just a lighthouse, and you know the lighthouse needs repair. I agree with Stormreed. I was not entirely sure of her realness either. Throughout all of this, I thought she might have been the first aspect, and she was like just his ability to compartmentalize, like, and that was her skill. That was her genius. Was like her ability to like be mindful and create this world and imagine. You know. And V.S. Drake mentions that they kept questioning the photos in the original plot, which goes all the way to the very end when he loses his other aspects, takes that time photo, and mentally places his other aspects in that photo. So like it makes you question like how much is real, how much isn't. But to him, as long as he can interact with the world in some way, does it matter, you know?
Yeah.
Well, with that, we have a question from VS Drake. What do you think about the 3 different plots?
The 3 plots.
Yeah.
It's a good question. You know, this is pitched as 3 different books compiled into one. I kind of like that aspect, if not breaking it into just 3 different parts of the same book. There's definitely like that trilogy feel to it where there is an overarching story, which is Stephen Leeds has a personality disorder and wants to get to the bottom of it. It's kind of the overarching story that flows throughout the 3 books. But each one is really well done in and of its own, I think, at making an interesting story that has nothing to do with the other ones. It's I feel like the 3rd book was way more Legion related than the first 2. The first 2 felt like what you would consider like a spin-off story, and the 3rd one kind of felt like the main story come to manifest. But where I think it played really well is, you know, giving us that introduction of how Stephen uses his aspects and the different ways that he can interact with the world with his aspects, especially with like creating new ones and keeping some at home and then ending up needing them and summoning them via a phone call or something like that. So yeah, I thought it was the third one felt like the story, and the first 2 felt like side stories that did a good introduction into the story.
Yeah, I agree on basically all those points. The first 2 feel a lot more episodic, like, and the last one feels like your season finale that takes points from the other episodes and puts it together for a story that really focuses on your main character and their development and bringing something to, like, bringing a major point into the light, but also leaving a question at the end of it. Like, I think somebody up at the top mentioned that this would make like a good mystery series or something, and it really would, in that regard of it's really easy to create these wild scenarios that only somebody who has an expertise in potentially any field could make happen. And then at the end, it's more about how does he deal with himself. And I like that you mentioned that the other 2 episodes are really good for setting up how he deals with his aspects. But I think, for me, one of the most compelling points is not just how he uses them in the world, but how he interacts with them becomes essential to the last episode, or the last part of the novella, the last plot line, because a lot of the stuff, if done without those first 2 episodes, would have seemed wild and out of nowhere. Like, yeah, of course this guy can just break out of a virtual reality simulation, but it only works because Brandon Sanderson did a good job in the other 2 of showing how he holds on to reality and the fiction that he puts into it. This guy has had to ride that line for so long, and he knows how it gets disrupted, what happens when it gets disrupted, and what it feels like. If it was like this dude's been training for that his whole damn life, you know, and it only works as well as it does because it's shown that like he puts in an effort that would make it seem plausible just to maintain the illusion. So when it breaks, of course, he's the one who knows how to break it, you know?
Yeah.
Or recompile it and add on the fact that the dude's just a straight up genius.
All right, I've got a topic for you.
All right. Lay it on me.
In the third book, we find out that, rephrase again. In the first book, Stephen confidently says that he knows what's real and what isn't real. Cut to the third book, he has an entire interview with somebody who isn't real and doesn't realize it. That makes you wonder, were there other things in the book that weren't real that Stephen thought were?
I think there is no right answer to that question by anybody other than Brandon Sanderson, and I think it's left intentionally vague. Because that's what it means to live with this. But I do think that enough is real that it doesn't take away from the stories, nor does it take away from Stephen's life. I think the enough important stuff is there. I think I would be disappointed to find out if the butler was fake. You know, shout out to Stormy's little bit about the butler becoming a huge influence by the end. I think that bit at the end where the butler does come out and say, like, you know, it turns out like this person has really been a touchstone for Stephen. If that was gone, I might think that, okay, it feels like a little bit like I'd be waiting for that moment of like the grandpa like wakes up and it was all a dream or something, like a Rugrats style ending, and that would be dissatisfying. So I like to believe that it was like the stuff that he believes is real is mostly real, but I think there probably were things that were not as real as he thought, you know, like things where his mind filled in the gaps.
Yeah, I had one thing that I was like, oh, if he actually can't tell what's real and what's not real, then maybe ... And this kind of takes away from the butler a little bit. Stephen talks at length about how Wilson goes above and beyond to make Stephen feel like his aspects are real and treat his aspects like they're actually in the room by, you know, bringing extra cups of lemonade and holding the door open extra long so that all the aspects can get in. And he even goes to the point of like pointing out that somebody else holds the door open for Stephen and then shuts it too soon so that not all of his aspects can get in, and there's a huff about having to reopen the door or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what if that's like a thing that's just in Stephen's head where he's like, oh, Wilson has known me for ages. He'd know to get extra lemonade. But in reality, Wilson has no idea he's supposed to get extra lemonade. And Stephen just imagines that he does.
I mean, that probably I think there is some of that does happen, but I think for the most part it doesn't, because there are elements where it shows how upsetting it is when that stuff happens, even by somebody who does know him. Like when Armando disappears and he has to like kind of break the fourth wall and be like, what do you see? And he's like, I see what I always did. And it's just like, it's a bed with like a comforter tucked in or something like that. And he's like, would you like me to pretend it's something else? And he's like, no. And then he processes it. And if it weren't for stuff like that, I might have that same thought. But like, I think that was a good like little thing put in there that, at least for me, lets me buy into the fact that this butler is just like, well, this is part of the job is, upholding the illusion, because that's what allows the sanity. And the other thing that makes that plausible is the fact that Steven specifically knows he's hallucinating these people, and that the illusion is partially upheld by him, and he's aware of that. If it weren't for that awareness, I might, and that sensitivity to when it's messed with, I think I'd be a lot more keen to believe that's the case. But I don't know. I think it might just be there's probably random stuff, but I don't really think the butler is where that lies personally. I hope not anyway.
See, I'm glad you brought that moment up though, because I think that's such a turning point in the story, because up until that point, Stephen makes a point of not asking, what do you see? Is this real?
Yeah.
Is this what I think it is?
Oh,
he's
yeah.
confident in his ability to tell the real world from the imaginary, and goes out of his way to not ask other people what they see. He's like, yeah, it's just, I know that that's real and that's not, for sure, 100%. And then he loses his grip and is like, all right, I've got to get help. What's here? It does make you wonder though, did he ever at some point in the past start asking, or start thinking to himself, all right, this is what's real, this is what's imaginary. Wilson, what's real in this room? Yep, that goes along with what I thought.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And I kind of lump that in more with Sandra, because for a long time, I don't know, I had some, and I should have brought this up when we were talking about her. I had some theories that she might be some kind of government scientist who knew that he was essentially an experiment because of all the work that he did with the government and stuff. And she was the one who taught him because she helped, she was a part of the genetic engineering or some mess like that. And it turns out, nope, she just deals with the same thing. Yeah, tin hats out, boys.
It's like the placebo effect. It's real unless you don't think it is.
Yeah, but for a long time I thought she was the one who took that spot. But now that you mention it, and I hadn't thought about this until you brought it up, the butler might have been that because he was also the one who confirmed that Sandra was real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
he's like, Sandra was real, right?
So he was ostensibly around when that happened, right? So or at least for part of it anyway, right? And I imagine there is a fair amount of that would have to go into I need to know the difference, how do I tell it? And it's probably a combination of the two, because one knows the hallucinations and one knows the real world, right?
Yeah. All right. Considering how we're on the everybody loves the butler kick, here's a butler related question. At one point in the third book, after we find out that Wilson is retiring, and Stephen's going crazy and starting to lose his grip on his sanity, Wilson asks him, am I the reason why you're going crazy? And Stephen says, no, it's not you. Do you think it was Wilson?
Yes and no. I don't think he was the one who started it, but this is a thing with anybody who has mental health issues that are significant. The ones that take that, the level of management that Stephen does to be able to function properly in with any semblance of normalcy in the real world, major changes often bring about they're triggering events. When you rely on routine, any major change to that routine is going to be tough to deal with. So in that regard, yeah, it was probably contributing to it, but you can kind of see the decline happening as early as the end of the second book, or not even the second, the beginning of, towards the end of the first one, you can kind of get a little bit of that as as Stephen starts to kind of question some stuff about the aspects that disappeared the first time, and you get these little glimmers of the aspects doing things that he's like, oh, that was a little weird, but whatever, it's a little bit different, but not a big deal. Yeah, the bit I'd want to point out to is JC and what's the psychologist woman's name again? Gotta throw it into chat if you know. But the psychiatrist
Ivy?
one. Yeah, Ivy. Yeah, so who are the main three are JC, Ivy, and
Ivy, JC, Tobias.
Kalyani is more like the third book, but yeah. So I was thinking of that moment when JC and Ivy are making out around the corner or whatever the hell, and he's just like, you guys, what? They've never, there's never been relationships between them before or whatever. And that was that first note, and that was timing wise implied that was well before Wilson mentioned retiring. So I think that's where it kind of is already starting. And I think the Wilson stuff is just it was crumbling, but that accelerated stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessarily going downhill at that point. I think at that point Stephen noticed ripples in the stream. But yeah, I don't know if we were necessarily going downhill yet.
I'm talking about the first signs, So
yeah. VS Drake asks, of all the aspects, who is your favorite aspect?
Oh, that's a bit tough. Because there were some really cool ones in there that I wish we would have heard more from. I think combination Tobias and Kalyani, actually. Tobias, I really liked. Tobias feels like he could fit into my head. Is just this guy who's just random facts and calming, soothing voice. I could use that in my head a little bit. But I think those aspects that showed him his ability to that had something that showed his ability to adapt were the most fun for me. Because Ivy was keep checking in with yourself. JC is a funny character and helps him survive, but I like the versatility of Tobias, and Kalyani was just that first instance of getting to see what it was like for him creating an aspect. Yeah. So I like those parts equally. Plus, it was kind of funny to see her just keep popping up and be like, "Hi, everybody loves me. Bye."
Mine was Jenny, the reporter that he manifested in the third.
Interesting.
Specifically because she was the only one that his subconscious created to deal with a problem. He consciously created others to deal with problems, but he subconsciously created Jenny to deal with his problem of facing hard facts.
Yep, she was my number 3, by the way, and like they're all pretty tight, pretty close. Like I don't think there's any that I actively like disliked or thought were stupid or something, but like those 3 really do stand out. Interesting though that nobody has chosen Ivy, like to like not to pose it as a different question, but like what about her didn't stand out the way that the others did for you?
I mean that's it's kind of like you can't you can only disprove, you cannot prove, kind of a
Oh, that's fair.
mentality thing.
I actually was gonna I brought it up as a question because like I had an answer and I was curious if you had like maybe a different one, but am of the same mind as Via Strake, as she felt a little bit predictable as an aspect of like, of course the guy with a who sees hallucinations would have created a psychologist, and who had, and of course she was the first female, so she has this kind of like motherly mentality. A bit like Shutter Island. So like it felt a little I think she felt a little one note sometimes, as you know. I know there's other aspects we haven't mentioned, like Ngozi, the OCD CSI character. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, Stormy. Tobias was awesome. I just think it's really cool to have like a manifestation that like is just history and knowledge, but is also, I think he's the first one that I guessed had a secondary meaning behind him, and it wasn't anything that you had to like, it wasn't obvious, but it wasn't held back. So he's the first one I was like, oh, you're not just facts, you are the one that kind of is, you know, helps organize the rest of them, keeps Stephen calm under pressure. And even and I even like the fact that at the end they show that he is a bit annoying sometimes and doesn't know when not to try to calm him down, because sometimes you just need to be pissed off or anxious or whatever. And he's like, oh, not the time, sorry. I'm not helping, am I? You know, and I thought that was like a really cool thing. Yeah, fun fact?
Fun fact. Apparently all of the aspects except Kayani were loosely based on famous actors. Ivy was based on Gwyneth Paltrow.
Oh, I would not have guessed that. I'm assuming that it was either James Earl Jones or why am I blanking on one of the most famous actors of like out there, Morgan Freeman. Or am I way? Do you have who he was based off of?
I don't see it. No. Just says Ivy was based on Gwyneth Paltrow. 5 memory. Clicking links and going into the wormhole. JC was based on Adam Baldwin.
Really?
Ivy was based on Gwyneth Paltrow. That's it. That's all he says.
I would not have guessed. I mean, I guess maybe it's because the voice was like really nasally and like New Jersey accent-ish, But I can see Adam Baldwin because this is basically his Firefly character.
Yeah.
Or possibly Full Metal Jacket, but you know, like no, for me it was like Morgan Freeman or James Earl Jones was the like Tobias character. Like I guess Chad, if you have any other thoughts. Yeah, Tobias is Morgan Freeman was my first guess. That's pretty interesting though. Makes you wonder who some of the less used characters were. But let's see here. I had a question about what did you think about the idea that when one of the aspects dies, Steven loses the knowledge? Do you think it's permanently gone? Or he just struggles to access it? Or something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was definitely on my to ask list for tonight too. I think he still has it. It's just walled up behind his grip on reality. You know, he treats certain things as happening because they have to happen in order to keep the illusion alive that they're real and not figments of his imagination. You know, like if somebody throws a cup at his illusion, he has to imagine them going to clean it up, kind of a thing, because obviously they fumbled it and dropped it because they can't actually catch it. I think it's just that to him, except more in his mind than outside his mind, is that if he loses an aspect, he has to lose the knowledge, so he just walls it off. But if he were to, say, imagine himself creating another aspect that had the exact same kind of knowledge, he would probably just automatically unlock that knowledge again without having to read the book. So I would like to think of it.
I think that would be an easy solution, but one of the things that it bumps up against for me, and maybe this is like if there were ever to be a follow-up novella, although it doesn't seem that way by the way Brandon Sanderson talks about it, I think that would be a good potential solution, but I think it would also mean overcoming that idea of you have to shatter the illusion of the death of your aspects. I do agree. I think the knowledge is there, but I don't think it's just a matter of creating that new character because, or that new aspect. It might be easier to relearn, but it feels like there would either have to be like a workaround, like this guy was an astrophysicist, but this guy was was like a quantum physicist or something, and there's just enough overlap there, you know, like, or it could be something that like I like that there's a lot of potential workarounds and that it would take growth for him to be able to deal with that, because you're right, like he has to get past that death somehow, whether or not it's like a coping workaround or if it is a permanent way to deal with their so-called deaths, especially those that like turn nightmare. He's going to have to like face it somehow, and his ability to blur, like to see reality while blurring the lines between it is an interesting prospect to think about, in my opinion. And I thought it was handled pretty well in the book when they disappeared. You can see how cut and dry it is to him initially, because like he's looking at a car, he's like, have you guys ever heard of Lexus? You know, like you forgot what Alexis is, my guy. Like, it was one thing when he was like, yeah, I don't know what like that specific photography thing is, but it's another thing to not know what the Lexus is or the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, the
and
Eiffel Tower one.
yeah, and I agree with Via Straight that like ultimately this is the point of that newspaper person is she's an archive. She is a way to access those things. It's just a matter of, is she going to help manifest them again and overcome the death entirely, or is she just going to be a means for creating these new aspects that can also access that information? You know, like, or are they forever gone and somehow he's able to fully integrate that knowledge into himself again? You know, like when they die, I now have that knowledge and I just have to kind of go through the archive. Yeah, I do think she's a part of the long-term solution for sure via Drake. I'm curious, Storm Reed, about what you caught that made you think they were going to bring Tobias back at the end specifically. If it was it just Jenny or was it something else? But yeah, I really like that as a concept, that there is multiple ways he could go about this, and I know it seems like this is the end, but I want more.
Speaking of the end, we are running short on time, so why don't we jump into final thoughts?
All right. So my final thoughts, I would absolutely recommend this book. Like, the pacing is so different from most Brandon Sanderson books, but I would recommend this book to anybody. In fact, I would almost recommend this book to people who don't like Brandon Sanderson books. Like, if for whatever reason you don't like it, I'd still recommend this one to you because it is so different, but he does such a good job of like developing a very interesting character with a premise that is just enough sci-fi to be compelling in that regard. And like, I know we didn't touch a lot on it, but the sci-fi aspects of this were pretty cool. Like a camera that can shoot back into the past and the philosophical elements of like how that sort of technology could be used for good or bad. There's a lot of this stuff that felt a little bit like Black Mirror, and yeah, it was really compelling, great characters. I would say maybe one of the few flaws is sometimes it could get a bit convoluted, but kind of the nature of the game, right? Yeah, definitely would recommend. It is near the top, I would say, of some of the books that we've read on this show, period. And I like that it's like novellas and like 3 novellas that wrap up into like one whole book. It's really sound, well done, well written, compelling, cool characters, etc. What about you, Adam?
Sorry, caught me in a yawn. I thought it was a really nice book. I would recommend it. I agree with what V.S. Drake just popped up there. Perfect vacation / beach read. It's not a terribly intense book, and you do have to kind of suspend your suspicion of reality in order to accept Stephen Leeds as a character. But I think Brando Sando does a good job of towing that line between fantasy and reality, and this is a good example of that towing. I really enjoyed Sanderson's attempt at writing a character-based novel instead of a world-based novel. He's got a couple of them out there, and this is one of the good ones. Not that there's many bad ones, but this is one of the good ones. Yeah. Storm also said, good book, too short. I want 20 hours. Yeah. It'd be nice to have some more time with Stephen Leeds. There is an additional book out there, in the Stephen Leeds universe. It's Stephen Leeds' Death and Faxes. I think he wrote that with somebody else. But it is a Stephen Leeds book, so if you're interested, you can check that out too.
Don't mind
That
if
came
I
out
do.
June of 2022, so semi-new.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and do our quick little wrap-ups?
Yeah, so next book's up on the docket. We've got April 20th, 2024. We already know about this one. It's Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And then May the 4th, we will be with you for A Forest of Vanity and Valor by A.P. Beswick. I'm not sure if I've read that one, so hopefully it's good. I don't remember what that one is.
I mean, I would assume that we got some votes on that one. But yeah, May the 4th be with us when we get going. Remember that for May, bring along your buddies and everything. That was the one that anybody could vote on. So thank you for those of you who did participate in that. June is going to be our big, beautiful book summer. So it's going to be all extra long books because we are going from our show on May the 4th, and it is going to be not until the end of June. So you will have essentially 2 months to read the book. So we are going for a bit of a longer one, so you may still want to start pretty early on. And we will figure out July and August as we kind of get a little more concrete on when we are all going to be available for the show. So look forward to that. Summer gets a little dicey.
Kind of get a little wonky, so
yeah.
We're here when we can be.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Remember, check us out DM's Table when, if and when you get a chance, and if you really want to engage with us, head on over to, go ahead and get our Discord. But with that, thanks everybody for joining us, and see you next book.
See you guys next book. I don't have a book in reach.